Marcus Cole was alone in the dark of space when the distress signal came through his ship's old speakers. Crackling and weak like a dying heartbeat that refused to stop, he had been working the outer rim of the Valen sector for 3 months now, digging through the wreckage of dead ships and abandoned stations, selling whatever he found to buy food and fuel for another week of the same lonely work. His ship was called the Dusty Dreamer, and it was not much to look at, with its rusty hull and engines that made strange sounds whenever he pushed them too hard. But it was home, and it was his, and that was enough for a man like Marcus, who had left Earth with nothing but a bag of clothes and a head full of dreams. The signal was coming from an uncharted moon about 2 hours away at standard speed, and his ship's eye, a simple program he had named Penny, told him in her flat mechanical voice that he should ignore it. The signal origin shows no registered vessels in any database, Penny said through the speakers, and salvage laws in this sector require official claims before recovery operations can begin. So I recommend we continue on our planned route to Station 47. Marcus listened to the signal again, and underneath all the static and interference, he could hear something that made his chest tight with worry. It was a voice, alien and strange, but clearly desperate, repeating the same words over and over in a language he did not understand. Someone was hurt out there. Someone was dying. And Marcus Cole was not the kind of man who could fly away from that and still look at himself in the mirror the next morning. Change course to the signal origin, he said, already strapping himself into the pilot's seat. This action is not recommended, Penny replied. I know, Marcus said, but we are going anyway. The moon was a gray and lifeless rock covered in dust and craters, and Marcus had to fly low over the surface for almost an hour before he finally saw what he was looking for. Crashed ship was like nothing he had ever seen in all his years of salvage work. It was beautiful in a way that made him feel small and poor, with a hull that seemed to glow with soft blue light even though it was broken and burning, and designs carved into the metal that looked like frozen rivers of starlight. This was not human technology, and it was not anything from the 3 or 4 alien races that humans had made contact with over the last 100 years. This was something old and powerful and completely beyond his understanding. Marcus landed the Dusty Dreamer about 50 meters from the wreckage and put on his environment suit, checking the oxygen levels twice before he opened the airlock and stepped out onto the gray dust of the moon. The crash ship was even larger up close, at least 5 times bigger than his own vessel, and the damage was terrible. To see something had torn through the hull from the outside, leaving holes the size of cars that still glowed red at the edges. And Marcus realized with a cold feeling in his stomach that this was not an accident. Someone had attacked this ship. Someone had tried to kill whoever was inside, and that someone might still be nearby, but the distress signal was still playing, weaker now but still calling for help. And Marcus could not turn back. He climbed through one of the holes in the hull and found himself in a corridor filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. The walls were covered with symbols that glowed faintly in colors he had no names for, and the floor was slippery with a silver liquid that he realized after a moment was blood, alien blood. But still blood, still a sign that someone had suffered here. He followed the trail deeper into the ship, stepping over debris and broken machinery, until he came to a large room that must have been important because the walls were covered with screens, and the ceiling was painted with images of stars and planets. And there, in the middle of all that destruction, he found her. She was pinned under a heavy beam that had fallen from the ceiling, and she was not moving. Marcus ran to her side and dropped to his knees, forgetting all about salvage laws and unknown aliens and the danger he might be in. She was tall and thin, with skin that seemed to shimmer like moonlight on water, and her hair was long and silver and spread out around her head like a halo. Her eyes were closed, but he could see that she was breathing. Slow and shallow breaths that made her chest rise and fall, just barely enough to show she was still alive. There were others in the room. 4 of them, wearing armor and carrying weapons. But they were all dead, their bodies broken and still. And Marcus understood that they had been protecting her. They had died trying to keep her safe. And now he was the only one left who could help. The beam was heavy. Far too heavy for him to lift alone, but he had brought tools from his ship. And he went back for them without hesitation. It took him 6 hours to cut through the beam with his plasma torch, working slowly and carefully so he would not hurt her. And by the time he was done, his arms were shaking and his suit was soaked with sweat, but she was free. And when he checked her wounds, he saw that she was bleeding badly from a gash in her side, the silver blood flowing out of her like water from a broken pipe. He used his medical supplies, the expensive ones he had been saving for emergencies, the ones that would cost him 3 months of work to replace. And he did not think twice about I, bandaged her wound and gave her an injection that his medical scanner said should work on most carbon-based life forms. And then he carried her back to his ship, holding her in his arms like she weighed nothing at all. She was so light, so fragile. And Marcus felt a strange feeling in his heart that he did not have words for. He put her in his own bed because it was the only bed on the ship. And he covered her with his blanket and sat down in the chair beside her to watch and wait. He never went back to search the crashed ship for valuables. He never checked her belongings for anything. He could sell. He never even thought about what she might be worth to someone who would pay for information about an unknown alien species. He just sat there in the dark of his small ship, watching a stranger breathe, hoping she would live through the night. And when Penny asked him what he planned to do when she woke up, Marcus just shrugged and said the only thing that made sense to him: "I guess we will figure that out when it happens." Outside the window, the stars burned cold and distant, and somewhere out there the people who had attacked this woman were still flying free, not knowing that a simple human salvager had found their victim and refused to let her die. Marcus Cole did not know that he had just changed the course of history. He did not know that the woman sleeping in his bed was a princess of one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. He did not know that his simple act of kindness would shake the foundations of empires and force entire species to question everything they believed about the universe. All he knew was that someone had needed help, and he had been there to give it, and for Marcus Cole, that was reason enough. 3 days passed on the Dusty Dreamer, and Marcus barely slept at all. During that time, he checked on his passenger every few hours, making sure her bandages were clean and her breathing was steady. And he talked to her sometimes, even though she could not hear him, telling her stories about Earth and his family and the reason he had come out to the stars in the first place. He did not know if she could understand human language, and he did not know if his medicine was actually helping or slowly making things worse. But he did everything he could and hoped it would be enough. On the morning of the 4th day, she opened her eyes. Marcus was sitting in his chair, eating a protein bar, when he heard her move. And he turned to see her staring at him with eyes that looked like broken galaxies, swirling with colors he had never seen before. She tried to sit up and gasped in pain. And Marcus jumped out of his chair and held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "Hey, easy there," he said in a calm voice. "You are hurt pretty bad, and you need to rest. So please just stay still for a minute." She looked at him with an expression he could not read. And then she spoke in a voice that was like music and thunder at the same time. He did not understand a single word. They stared at each other for a long moment. And then Marcus pointed to himself and said his name slowly and clearly. "Marcus," he said. "My name is Marcus." She seemed to understand, and she pointed to herself and said something that sounded like Alendra, though the way she pronounced it had sounds his throat could not make. "Alendra," Marcus repeated. doing his best. That is a beautiful name over the next few hours. They tried to communicate through gestures and pictures and pointing at things. And Marcus learned that she was indeed called Alindra, and that she was very confused about why she was on his ship. She kept making a gesture that looked like an exchange, holding out one hand and then the other, and Marcus finally understood that she was asking what he wanted in return for saving her. Nothing, he said, shaking his head and holding up his empty hands. I do not want anything. Alindra stared at him like he had just said the most insane thing in the history of the universe. She tried the gesture again, more insistently this time, and Marcus could see frustration building in her strange and beautiful eyes. I helped you because you needed help, Marcus said, knowing she probably could not understand the words, but hoping she might understand the tone. That is all? That is the only reason. She did not believe him. That much was clear from the way she watched him over the following days, always suspicious, always waiting for the moment when he would reveal his true intentions. Marcus gave her his bed and slept on the floor of the cargo bay. He shared his food with her, even though his supplies were running low and he would need to find a station soon. Showed her how to use the ship's simple entertainment system. And he laughed when she discovered music and spent hours listening to everything from classical symphonies to old rock songs with a look of wonder on her face. And still she waited for the trick, for the trap, for the moment when kindness would turn into cruelty on the 5th day. Alindra's injuries had healed enough for her to walk around the ship, and Marcus found her standing in the cockpit, looking out at the stars with an expression of deep sadness on her face. He stood beside her in silence, not wanting to intrude, and after a while she turned to him and spoke again in her language. This time, something was different. The words seemed to shimmer in the air, and suddenly Marcus could understand them, like they were being translated directly into his brain. I have activated a translation matrix, Alindra said, and her voice in his head was cool and formal. Now we can speak properly. And you can tell me what you truly want. Marcus blinked in surprise at the technology, but he did not let it distract him from her question. I already told you, he said. I do not want anything. That is impossible, Alindra replied. And there was something almost desperate in her voice. Nothing in this galaxy is given freely. Everything has a price. Every kindness is a contract waiting to be collected. So tell me what you want before I go mad trying to figure it out myself. Marcus leaned against the wall and crossed his arms, looking at this strange and beautiful woman who could not understand the simplest thing about him. Where I come from, he said slowly. We have a saying that goes like this. You do not need a reason to help someone. You only need a reason not to. Alindra stared at him with those galaxy eyes, and Marcus could see that she was struggling to process what he was saying. I found you dying in a crashed ship, Marcus continued, and I had the tools and the medicine to help you. So I helped you, and that is the entire story. There is no hidden chapter. There is no secret contract. There is just a man who saw someone in trouble and did what he could. But the cost, Alindra said, and her voice was quieter now. Your medical supplies, your time, your resources. These things have value, and you spent them on a stranger you had never met. Yes, Marcus agreed. And I would do it again tomorrow without thinking twice. Something shifted in Alindra's expression. And for the first time since she had woken up, she looked at Marcus, not with suspicion, but with something closer to wonder. I am Alindra Vrathan, she said. And the words carried a weight that Marcus could feel even without understanding why. Third daughter of the Celestine Dominion, princes of a civilization that has ruled the stars for 50,000 years, and in all that time, no one has ever done for me what you have done. Marcus felt his eyebrows rise in surprise, but he forced himself to stay calm. Okay, he said, that is a lot to take in. But it does not change anything. How can it not change anything? Alindra demanded, stepping closer to him. I am royalty. I am valuable beyond measure. You could ransom me for wealth that would make you a king among your people. And yet you sit here telling me you want nothing at all. I do not want to ransom you, Marcus said firmly. And I do not want to be a king. I just want to get you home safe and then go back to my work. Alendra was silent for a long moment. And then she did something that surprised Marcus more than anything else that had happened. She laughed. It was a small laugh. Quiet and uncertain, like she had forgotten how to do it properly. But it was real, and it transformed her face into something warm and alive. My father will not believe me when I tell him about you, she said, shaking her head. My entire court will think I have gone insane. Why? Marcus asked. Because you are impossible, Alendra replied. And there was something new in her eyes now. Something that looked almost like hope in all the galaxy. In all the species we have encountered across thousands of years, we have never found anyone who gives without taking. She reached out and touched his arm, and her fingers were cool and gentle. What kind of creature are you, Marcus Cole? She asked softly. Marcus thought about the question. Thought about his mother who had worked 3 jobs to send him to school. Thought about his father who had given his life pushing a stranger out of the path of a runaway vehicle. Thought about all the humans he had known who had sacrificed and struggled and helped each other through the darkness. I am just a human, he said. And where I come from, this is just what we do. Alindra kept her hand on his arm. And Marcus saw something change in her forever. She was starting to believe him, and she did not know yet what that belief would cost her, or what it would give her, or how it would change everything she thought she knew about the universe. But standing there in the cockpit of a rusty old salvage ship, looking at a man who wanted nothing from her except her safety, Princess Alendra Vothan felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt safe. The warships appeared without warning, dropping out of some kind of faster-than-light travel that made Marcus's old engines look like toys from a child's playroom. One moment the stars were empty and quiet, and the next moment there were 12 massive vessels surrounding the dusty dreamer, each one bigger than any space station Marcus had ever seen, each one bristling with weapons that glowed with terrible power. Marcus felt his heart stop in his chest as alarms screamed through his ship, and he looked at Alindra with wide eyes. Friends of yours? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. Galendra looked out at the fleet with an expression of relief and something else that might have been worry. My father's rescue fleet, she said. I activated a beacon when I crashed, and it seems they have finally found me. That is good, Marcus said. That is really good. You can go home now. But Alindra did not look happy. And before Marcus could ask why, a voice boomed through his ship's speakers in a language he should not have been able to understand. Unknown vessel. You are carrying a member of the royal family of the Celestine Dominion. You will power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in your immediate destruction. Marcus looked at his pathetic little ship, looked at the fleet of warships that could turn him into dust with a single shot, and then looked at Alindra. I was not planning on resisting, he said. The boarding party arrived minutes later. Soldiers in armor that seemed to bend light around them, carrying weapons that hummed with energy. Marcus could feel in his teeth. They swept through the dusty dreamer like a wave, checking every room and corner, and when they finally confirmed that Alindra was safe and unharmed, they turned their attention to Marcus. He was taken from his ship at gunpoint, marched through a transport beam that made his skin tingle, and brought aboard the largest of the warships. The inside of the Dominion vessel was like nothing he had ever imagined. The walls were made of something that looked like liquid light, constantly shifting and flowing, and the air smelled like flowers and lightning and the space between stars. Marcus was taken to a room that was clearly meant to intimidate, with a ceiling so high he could barely see it and a floor that seemed to float over an endless void of stars, and at the far end of the room, sitting on a throne that looked like it was carved from a frozen sun, was the oldest and most terrifying creature Marcus had ever seen. High Sovereign Calverth of the Celestin. Dominion was tall and thin like his daughter, but where Alindra's beauty was soft and gentle, his was hard and sharp like a blade made of ice. His skin was the color of deep space, scattered with points of light that looked like actual stars, and his eyes were pits of cold fire that seemed to look through Marcus and into his very soul. "So," the Sovereign said, and his voice was like the death of galaxies, "you are the creature that found my daughter." Marcus swallowed hard and forced himself to stand straight. "Yes, sir," he said. "I found her ship crashed on a moon, and I helped her." "Helped her," the Sovereign repeated, and the words dripped with suspicion. "And what did you take in return for this help?" "Nothing," Marcus said. The Sovereign leaned forward on his throne, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. "Do not play games with me, human," he said. "I have ruled this dominion for 3,000 years. I have negotiated with empires and crushed civilizations, and I know that nothing in this universe is given freely. So tell me what you want before I lose my patience and have you executed for wasting my time." Marcus felt fear crawling up his spine, but he also felt something else. Something stronger. He felt angry. "With all respect, Your Highness," Marcus said, and his voice was steady now, "I do not want anything. I found your daughter dying, and I saved her because that is what decent people do. And I do not care if you believe me or not, because I know the truth." The Sovereign's advisors gasped at the human's boldness, and several of the soldiers moved their hands toward their weapons, but the Sovereign held up one long-fingered hand, and everyone froze. "Scan him," the Sovereign commanded. A beam of light washed over Marcus, and he felt it probing his mind, searching through his thoughts and memories like fingers flipping through the pages of a book. It was uncomfortable and invasive, but Marcus did not try to fight it because he had nothing to hide. After a long moment, one of the advisors stepped forward with a look of confusion on her face. "My Sovereign," she said carefully, "the scan shows no deception, no hidden motives, no agenda of any kind. The human appears to be telling the truth." "Impossible," the Sovereign said flatly. "I ran it 3 times, the advisor replied. "The results are consistent." He genuinely expected nothing in return. The room fell silent, and Marcus watched as the most powerful being in this part of the galaxy struggled to understand something that every human child learned before they could walk. The Sovereign rose from his throne and walked toward Marcus, his footsteps making no sound on the floating floor. He stopped just inches away, towering over the human, and looked down at him with those terrible, burning eyes. "Why?" the Sovereign asked, and for the first time his voice held something other than cold authority. "Why would you risk your life and spend your resources for a stranger? What possible reason could you have?" Marcus thought about the question, thought about how to explain something that needed no explanation to anyone from Earth. "On my planet," he said quietly, "we have people who run into burning buildings to save strangers. We have people who donate their own blood and organs to people they have never met. We have people who die protecting, others not, because they will gain anything, but because they cannot stand to watch someone suffer when they have the power to help." Marcus looked up at the Sovereign and met those ancient eyes without flinching. "Your daughter was hurt, and I could help her," he said. "That is the only reason I need. That is the only reason any human would need." The Sovereign stared at him for a long moment, and then he did something that made every advisor in the room take a step back in shock. He laughed. It was not a warm laugh or a kind laugh, but it was genuine, a sound of pure disbelief at something he could not comprehend. "In 3,000 years, the Sovereign said, no one has ever spoken to me like that. No one has ever stood before me without wanting something, without calculating what they could gain." He turned and walked back to his throne, his hands clasped behind his back. "I do not know what to do with you, Marcus Cole," he admitted. "You break every rule I have learned about how the universe works. You are either the greatest fool I have ever met or something else entirely." A door opened at the side of the room, and Alindra walked in, still wearing the simple clothes Marcus had given her. Still carrying herself like the princess she was. "Father," she said, "I need to speak with you about the human." The sovereign looked at his daughter, and Marcus saw something soften in those cold eyes. "I am listening," he said. Alindra walked to stand beside Marcus, and she looked at her father with a determination that Marcus had not seen in her before. "What he told you is true," she said. "I watched him for days, waiting for the trap, waiting for the betrayal, and it never came. He is exactly what he appears to be, a man who helps others because he cannot imagine doing anything else." She took a breath and continued, "And I think," she said carefully, "that his people might be exactly the same." The sovereign looked from his daughter to Marcus and back again, and Marcus could see calculations happening behind those ancient eyes, possibilities being weighed, futures being considered. "If that is true," the sovereign said slowly, "then these humans are either the most valuable allies in the galaxy, or the most dangerous threat we have ever faced." Marcus did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. He just stood there, a simple salvager from Earth, caught up in something much bigger than himself, hoping that telling the truth would be enough to keep him alive. And somewhere in the depths of the Dominion flagship, word was already spreading about the impossible human who gave without taking, the creature who defied everything the galaxy believed about the nature of intelligent life. The debate about humanity had begun. Nothing would ever be the same again. The Court of Stars had not gathered in emergency session for over 500 years. But today, the Great Hall was filled with the most powerful beings in the Celestine Dominion, all of them arguing about a single human man sitting in a holding cell 3 decks below Marcus. Did not know any of this was happening. He sat on a small bench in his cell, staring at the wall and wondering if he would ever see the dusty dreamer again. Wondering if he would ever see Earth again. Wondering if saving one life had cost him his own. The cell was not uncomfortable, and his captors had given him food and water, and even a blanket. But he was still a prisoner, and he did not know why. Meanwhile, far above him, Alindra stood before the assembled court and fought for his freedom. "You have all seen the reports," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the massive chamber. "You have all reviewed the scans and the analysis and the historical records we pulled from the human's vessel. So you know that I am not lying when I tell you that this species is unlike anything we have ever encountered." The court murmured and shifted. Thousands of beings from dozens of noble houses, all of them watching the princess with expressions that ranged from curiosity to fear to outright hostility. Lord from one of the outer houses rose to speak, his voice sharp with contempt. "The princess asks us to believe that an entire species practices unconditional altruism," he said. "But this is clearly impossible. Evolution does not reward such behavior. Any species that gave without taking would be exploited into extinction within a few generations." Alindra shook her head firmly. "I thought the same thing," she admitted. "So I spent the last 2 days studying their history. And what I found changed everything I believed about what is possible," she gestured. And holographic images appeared in the air above the court. Images of humans throughout history. "They have a word for it," Alindra said. "They call it heroism. And they celebrate it as the highest virtue their species can achieve." The images showed firefighters running into collapsing buildings, soldiers throwing themselves on explosives to save their comrades, ordinary people jumping into frozen rivers to rescue strangers. "They give blood to people they will never meet," Alindra continued. "They donate organs while they're still alive. They volunteer their time and their money and their labor for causes that will never benefit them. Personally, she turned to face the court directly, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. They even have people who dedicate their entire lives to helping others, she said. They call them doctors and nurses and aid workers and 100 other names. And they are honored for their sacrifice. The court was silent now. The murmuring stopped. Every eye fixed on the princess and the impossible things she was describing. This is not rational, another lord said, his voice uncertain. This cannot be sustainable. And yet their species has survived for hundreds of thousands of years, Alendra replied. And in just the last few centuries, they have gone from primitive technology to space travel. And do you know what they did when they first reached the stars? She paused, letting the question hang in the air. They sent messages of peace, she said. They sent music and art and greetings in dozens of languages. They announced their presence to the universe, not with weapons or demands, but with an invitation to be friends. A wave of shock rippled through the cordon. The history of the Celestine Dominion. No species had ever announced itself to the galaxy without demands or threats. No species had ever reached out with open hands instead of closed fists, the High Sovereign, who had been watching in silence from his throne, finally spoke. What you are describing, he said slowly, is a species that operates completely outside the rational self-interest that governs every other civilization we have encountered. A species that cannot be predicted, cannot be controlled, cannot be understood through the lens of normal diplomacy. Yes, Alendra agreed. And that is exactly what makes them valuable. She turned to address the court again, her voice rising with passion. For 50,000 years we have dealt with species that want what we want, that think the way we think, that can be bought and sold and manipulated because we understand their motivations, she said. But these humans are different. They are wild and unpredictable, and they do things for reasons we cannot calculate. That makes them dangerous. A voice called out from the crowd. It makes them interesting, Alendra shot back. It makes them the most fascinating discovery in the history of our civilization. And if we destroy them or enslave them or exploit them like we have done to so many others, we will lose something precious beyond measure. She walked to the center of the chamber and stood alone, a single figure surrounded by the power and wealth of an ancient empire. I am asking this court to do something it has never done before, she said. I am asking you to show kindness to a species that has done nothing but show kindness to us. And if we refuse? Her father asked from his throne. His voice neutral and unreadably Landra met his eyes without flinching. Then we prove that we are exactly what the universe expects us to be, she said. Cold and calculating and selfish, and we lose any chance to become something better. The debate raged for hours after that. Lords and ladies arguing back and forth, some calling for Marcus to be released and humanity to be contacted peacefully. Others demanding that Earth be conquered before this dangerous species could spread its irrational influence across the galaxy. Through it all, Marcus sat in his cell and knew nothing of the battle being fought on his behalf. He thought about home, about his mother who would never know what happened to him, about the little apartment on Mars where he had grown up, about the stars he had always wanted to explore. He thought about Alendra and her galaxy eyes and the way she had looked at him when she finally understood that he truly wanted nothing from her, and he thought about what his father would have done in this situation. His father who had died pushing a stranger out of the way of a speeding vehicle. His father who had never hesitated to help someone in need. I hope I made you proud, Dad, Marcus whispered to the empty cell. I hope I did the right thing. Far above him, the court finally fell silent as the High Sovereign rose from his throne. I have heard enough, he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. I will make my decision, and it will be final. He looked at his daughter, at this child of his who had somehow been changed by a few days on a rusty human ship. And he saw something in her eyes that he had not seen in centuries. Hope. "Bring the human to me," the Sovereign commanded. "I would speak with him once more before I decide the fate of his species," and in his cell 3 decks below, Marcus heard footsteps approaching and knew that one way or another, his story was about to end. He stood up straight, took a deep breath, and prepared to face whatever came next with the same simple courage that had led him to save a dying stranger on a distant moon. He was just a human, after all, and this was just what humans did. The throne room was empty when Marcus was brought before the High Sovereign for the second time. The thousands of courtiers and nobles dismissed so that only 3 people remained in that vast and echoing space. Marcus stood in the center of the room, his hands unbound but guards still visible at the doors. Facing the ancient ruler of the Celestine Dominion and beside the throne stood Alindra, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes burning with something Marcus could not quite identify. "Marcus Cole of Earth," the Sovereign said, his voice filling the room without seeming to rise above a whisper. "I have spent 2 days listening to debates about you, about your species, about what you represent and what should be done with you." Marcus said nothing, knowing that nothing he could say would change whatever decision had already been made. "My advisors are divided," the Sovereign continued. "Some believe your species is a threat that must be contained. Others believe you are a resource to be exploited. And a few believe you are a curiosity to be studied and eventually forgotten." He leaned forward on his throne, and those cold, burning eyes fixed on Marcus with terrible intensity. "But my daughter believes something different," he said. "My daughter believes that you represent something the galaxy has lost, something we abandoned long ago in our pursuit of power and survival." The Sovereign rose from his throne and walked down the steps toward Marcus, his tall form casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the light. "She believes that your people still remember how to be kind," he said, "that you still value compassion over calculation, that you still help strangers, not because it benefits you, but because you cannot imagine doing anything else." Marcus found his voice at last. "She is right," he said simply. "That is exactly what we are." The Sovereign stopped just in front of him, close enough that Marcus could see the stars glittering in the depths of his dark skin. "I have ruled this dominion for 3,000 years," the Sovereign said quietly. "And in all that time, I have never once acted without expecting something in return. I have never given a gift that was not also a calculation. I have never shown mercy without considering how it would benefit my position." He tilted his head, studying Marcus like a scientist studying an impossible creature. "You have forced me to question everything I believe about how the universe works," the Sovereign said. "And I am not certain whether to thank you or hate you for it." "I did not mean to cause trouble," Marcus said. "I just wanted to help your daughter." "I know," the Sovereign replied. "And that is what makes this so difficult." He turned and walked back to his throne. But he did not sit down. "My daughter has convinced me to try something new," he said. "Something unprecedented in the history of the Celestine Dominion. And I want you to understand how significant this is." He gestured, and Alindra stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "Alindra will explain your reward," the Sovereign said. "Since she is the one who fought for it." Marcus felt his heart beating fast as Alindra walked toward him, her footsteps silent on the floating floor, her galaxy eyes fixed on his face. "Marcus Cole," she said, and her voice was formal but warm underneath. "You saved my life without expecting anything in return, and the Celestine Dominion has decided to respond in kind." She stopped in front of him and took a deep breath then. To Marcus's complete shock, she knelt, a princess of the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, daughter of a being who had ruled the stars for 3,000 years, knelt before a human salvager from a rusty ship called the Dusty Dreamer. "You gave without expectation," Alindra said. looking up at him with those impossible eyes. "So the Dominion will give in kind." She rose and held out her hand, and a holographic display appeared in the air between them. "First," she said, "humanity is to be elevated from minor uncontacted species to protected civilization under the Celestine Accord. This means your people will have legal recognition across the galaxy, protection from exploitation by any Dominion member race, and access to star maps that will expand your exploration capacity by a factor of thousands." Marcus stared at the display, barely able to comprehend what he was seeing. "Second," Alindra continued, "Earth will be granted a seat on the Council of Sovereigns. Non-voting for now, but with the opportunity to earn full membership through continued demonstration of your species' unique values." "This is," Marcus started. But Alindra held up her hand. "I am not finished," she said. And there was a small smile on her face now. "Those are the gifts to your people. But there are also gifts for you, personally." She gestured again, and the display changed to show a ship. A beautiful vessel that made the dusty dreamer look like a child's toy. "A Dominion scout ship," Alindra said. "Top of the line, registered in your name, with technology that will take your engineer centuries to fully understand." Marcus felt his legs go weak, but he forced himself to stay standing. Alindra reached into her robe and pulled out a small pendant on a chain, a piece of metal that seemed to glow with inner light. "And this," she said softly, "is a personal gift from me." She stepped forward and placed the pendant around Marcus's neck, her fingers brushing his skin with cool gentleness. "This marks you as a friend to the throne," she said. "It grants you sanctuary in any Dominion world, protection under my personal authority, and the right to call upon me whenever you have need." She stepped back and looked at him with an expression that was almost shy. "You asked for nothing," she said, "and that is precisely why you deserve everything." Marcus stood there in silence, the pendant warm against his chest, his mind trying to process the impossible thing that had just happened. "I do not understand," he finally managed to say. I just did what anyone would do." "That is exactly the point," the Sovereign said from his throne, and his voice was thoughtful now instead of cold. "You did what you believe anyone would do. But in all our long history, no one has ever done what you did. And that tells us something important about your species." He rose and walked down to stand beside his daughter. And for the first time, Marcus saw something almost warm in those ancient eyes. "We have encountered thousands of species," the Sovereign said, "and every single one of them has operated on the same principles of calculated self-interest. But your people are different. You help without calculation, you give without taking. You sacrifice for strangers without expectation of reward." He placed a hand on Alindra's shoulder. "My daughter believes this makes you valuable beyond measure," he said, "and I have decided to trust her judgment." Marcus looked from the Sovereign to Alindra and back again, and he felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. "I do not know what to say," he admitted. Alindra smiled. A real smile this time, warm and bright and beautiful. "Say you will visit," she said. "Say you will come back and tell me more stories about your people. Say you will help us learn how to be more like you." Marcus laughed, a small wet laugh that was half sob. "I can do that," he said. "I can definitely do that." He looked at the pendant around his neck, at the holographic display showing his new ship, at the princes who had fought for him and the ancient king who had listened. "I just wanted to save one person," he said quietly. "And somehow I changed everything." "That is what kindness does," Alindra said. "It spreads, it grows, it changes things in ways we cannot predict." She reached out and took his hand, and her fingers were cool and gentle. "You saved one life," she said. "And in return, you have opened the door between our peoples that can never be closed. You have given humanity a place among the stars that they could not have earned in 10,000 years of trying." Marcus squeezed her hand and felt something shift in his heart. Something that felt like hope and wonder, and the beginning of something new. "I guess I should get going then," he said. "Someone needs to tell Earth what just happened," Alindra laughed. "And the sound was like music. I suppose they do," she agreed. "But remember, Marcus Cole, you are always welcome here. The Dominion does not forget its friends." Marcus nodded and turned to leave. But he stopped at the door and looked back at the princess who had changed his life. "Thank you," he said, "for believing me when no one else would." Alindra smiled. "Thank you for giving me something to believe in," she replied, and Marcus Cole, simple salvager from Earth, walked out of the throne room and into a future that no human had ever imagined, carrying with him the knowledge that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could reshape the destiny of worlds behind him. The High Sovereign turned to his daughter with a thoughtful expression. "You truly believe they are what they appear to be?" He asked. Alindra watched Marcus go and nodded slowly. "I do," she said. "And I believe that is exactly what makes them the most important species in the galaxy." The Sovereign considered this for a long moment. "Then we had better hope you are right," he said. "Because if you are, these humans will change everything." Alindra smiled to herself. "I know," she said softly. "That is exactly what I am counting on." And somewhere in the depths of space, aboard a new ship that gleamed like starlight, Marcus Cole set a course for home, ready to tell his people that the universe was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than they had ever dreamed, and that all it took to find their place in it was a little kindness